My name is Sarah. For 90 years, I carried a secret ache in my heart, a longing so deep that some days I could barely breathe through the weight of it. I was the wife of Abraham, a man who spoke with God, a man who heard promises that seemed too beautiful to believe. And yet, I was barren. In our world, a woman without children was a woman without worth. I felt the stares in the marketplace, heard the whispers behind cupped hands. I watched other women cradle their babies, their eyes bright with purpose, while my arms remained empty, my tent silent except for the desert wind. But this is not just a story about waiting. It is a story about learning to trust when everything in your life screams that hope is foolish. It is about discovering that God's timeline is not our timeline, that His promises don't expire with our youth, and that sometimes our greatest testimonies are born from our longest winters. I laughed when God said I would bear a son. I laughed because the idea seemed absurd, impossible, laughable. But that laughter born from doubt and disbelief would transform into the laughter of pure joy. My son's name would mean laughter, and through him, nations would rise. If you've ever felt too old, too broken, too forgotten, this story is for you. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear them yet. My feet were dusty from another day's journey. We had left everything behind, our home and our family, the familiar streets where I had grown up. Abraham said God had spoken to him, called him to a land he had never seen, promised him descendants as numerous as the stars. I looked up at those stars every night. I tried to count them, tried to imagine how a man with no children could father nations. And I wondered quietly, privately, in the darkness of our tent, if God had forgotten about me and His grand plan. The promise was for Abraham, everyone said. God had spoken to my husband, not to me. But I felt the weight of that promise too. I carried it in my womb, or rather, in the emptiness where a child should have been. Month after month, year after year, I waited. I prayed. I wept into my pillow when Abraham was asleep, careful not to let him hear my grief. He had enough burdens to carry. The desert was unforgiving. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the sand into waves of shimmering heat. We traveled with our flocks, our servants, our tents rolled and unrolled countless times. Every place we stopped, I wondered if this would be where the promise would finally take root, but my body remained barren. I was beautiful once, Abraham told me so. Even pharaohs and kings noticed. But beauty fades, and with each passing year, I felt less like the woman Abraham had married and more like a failure. What good was beauty if it couldn't produce the one thing that mattered? I remember one particular night. We had camped near an oasis, and the palm trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. I could hear the women laughing as they drew water, their children playing nearby. I stayed in my tent, unable to bear the sight of their joy. Abraham came to me then. He sat beside me in the fading light, and I saw the lines of concern etched around his eyes. He was getting older too. We both were. Sarah, he said softly, taking my hand, God has not forgotten His promise. I wanted to believe him. Oh, how I wanted to believe. But faith is difficult when your body tells you a different story, when every month brings the same disappointment, when you stretch into decades and hope begins to feel like a cruel joke. How long must we wait? I whispered. He had no answer, only faith. Only trust in a God who spoke in promises but remained silent about the details. That night, I made a decision. If God would not work through me, perhaps He would work in spite of me. I would take matters into my own hands. I would give Abraham a child, even if I had to do it through someone else. It seemed so logical at the time. So reasonable. So very, very wrong. Hagar was young, beautiful, Egyptian. She had come to us during our time in Egypt, a gift from Pharaoh's household. She was strong, capable, and most importantly, she was fertile. I could see it in the way she moved, in the bloom of her youth. I presented my plan to Abraham. "The Lord has prevented me from bearing children," I said, keeping my voice steady, practical. "Go to my servant Hagar. Perhaps I can build a family through her." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out. This was how things were done in our culture. If a wife could not produce an heir, she could offer her servant as a substitute. It was acceptable, expected, even. Abraham agreed. I told myself this was wisdom. That I was helping God fulfill His promise. That sometimes we must take action rather than simply waiting. But deep in my heart, beneath all the rationalizations, I knew the truth. I was driven by desperation, not faith. I was trying to force God's hand, to make His promise happen on my timeline, in my way. Hagar conceived immediately. Of course she did. I watched her body change, saw the swell of life growing where my own womb had remained forever flat. And with each passing day, something dark and bitter took root in my soul. Hagar's attitude changed too. She looked at me differently, no longer with the deference of a servant, but with something that felt like triumph. Her eyes seemed to say, "I can do what you cannot. I am carrying his child. What are you?" The pain of it was unbearable. I had invited this situation, orchestrated it with my own hands, and now I was drowning in the consequences. Jealousy consumed me. Rage. Regret. I lashed out at Hagar, treated her harshly, made her life miserable. She fled into the wilderness. When I heard she had run away, I felt a momentary relief, followed immediately by shame. What had I become? This bitter, angry woman was not who I wanted to be. But God, merciful, gracious God, sent an angel to Hagar in the desert. He told her to return, to submit, and He promised that her son would also become a great nation. He would be called Ishmael, which means God hears. God heard her cry. Did He hear mine too? Ishmael was born, and Abraham loved him. I watched my husband cradle the boy, saw the pride in his eyes, and felt my heart break into smaller and smaller pieces. This was not the promise. I knew it, even if no one said it aloud. This child, born of my impatience and doubt, was not the fulfillment of God's word. And yet, 13 years passed. 13 years of watching Ishmael grow, of living with the constant reminder of my mistake, of wondering if God's promise had been transferred to another woman's son. I grew old. My body changed in the way bodies do when youth has long since fled. My hair grayed. My skin loosened. The possibility of bearing children seemed not just unlikely but absurd. And then, one ordinary day, everything changed. 3 visitors came to our tent at Mamre. Abraham ran to meet them, bowing low, offering them water and rest and food. I prepared bread, kneading the dough with practiced hands, while Abraham selected a choice calf for the meal. I listened from inside the tent as they ate. One of them spoke with an authority that made the air feel different, charged with something I couldn't name. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" he asked. "In the tent," Abraham replied. And then the visitor spoke words that stopped my heart. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound escaped before I could stop it, a laugh of disbelief, of impossibility, of something that felt too much like mockery to be anything else. I was old. Abraham was old. That part of life was finished, over, done. After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? I muttered to myself, but the visitor heard me. Why did Sarah laugh? He asked Abraham, is anything too hard for the Lord? Fear shot through me. This was no ordinary visitor. This was the Lord himself. I denied it, of course. I did not laugh, I said, my voice trembling. No, but you did laugh, he replied. And in that moment, I understood. My laughter of doubt was about to become a prophecy of joy. The visitors left, and I stood in the doorway of our tent, watching them disappear into the shimmering heat. My mind spun with questions, with fear, with a, could it be true? Could God really do the impossible? Was I really going to bear a child at 90 years old? The idea seemed absurd. My body had long since ceased its monthly rhythms. The possibility of conceiving a child felt as likely as the desert blooming with roses, and yet, God had said it. Not through a prophet, not through a dream, but face to face, his words clear and unmistakable. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That question haunted me. It challenged every logical thought, every reasonable doubt. It asked me to believe in a God who operated outside the boundaries of nature, who could breathe life into dead things, who could make a way where there was no way. I began to watch my body with new attention. Was that a flutter of nausea, a tenderness in my breasts? Or was I imagining things, desperately grasping at phantom symptoms because I wanted the promise to be true? Weeks passed. Then a month, then two. And then, undeniably, miraculously, impossibly, I knew. Life was growing inside me. At 90 years old, my womb had awakened. My body, which had been barren for decades, was now nurturing a child. I wept with joy and disbelief. I laughed, but this time, the laughter was different. It was the laughter of amazement, of wonder, of a heart that had been cracked open by grace. Abraham was overjoyed. He held me gently, as if I might break, his eyes bright with tears. We had waited so long, so very long, but the waiting wasn't over. Pregnancy at my age was dangerous. Every day, I marveled that I was still alive, still carrying this precious life. My body ached in ways I had never experienced. My back hurt. My feet swelled. Sleep was elusive, but I didn't complain. How could I? Every discomfort was a reminder that God was keeping his promise. Every flutter of movement inside me was a testament to his faithfulness. The other women noticed, of course. Word spread through the camp like wildfire. Sarah, the barren one, is pregnant. Some were amazed. Some were skeptical. Some whispered that it was impossible, that I must be mistaken. But I knew the truth. I carried it beneath my heart, felt it growing stronger each day. This child was not mine alone. He belonged to God's promise, to a plan that stretched far beyond my understanding. I often thought of Hagar during those months. She had given Abraham a son, yes, but Ishmael was not the child of promise. God had made that clear. This baby, this impossible, miraculous baby, was the one through whom nations would be blessed. It was a strange thing to contemplate that my son, not yet born, already had a destiny written in the stars, that through him, blessings would flow to people I would never meet, in times I would never see. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. But God was with me. I felt his presence in the quiet moments, in the still hours before dawn when I would place my hands on my swollen belly and pray. Thank you, I would whisper. Thank you for not forgetting me. Thank you for proving that nothing is too hard for you. As my time drew near, fear crept in. Would I survive the birth? Would the baby be healthy? Was I strong enough? at my age, to bring this child into the world. But underneath the fear was an unshakable certainty God had brought me this far. He would not abandon me now. The day came suddenly, as these things often do. The pains began in the morning, sharp and insistent. The midwives came, their faces a mixture of concern and excitement. No one knew what to expect. A 90-year-old woman giving birth was unprecedented. The hours stretched long and difficult. But I held on to faith, held on to the promise, held on to the knowledge that God was in control. And then, finally, blessedly a cry. The sound of new life, loud and strong and perfect. A son, the midwife said, her voice full of wonder. You have a son. They placed him in my arms, this tiny, miraculous boy, and I looked into his face and laughed. Not the laugh of doubt from a year ago, but the laugh of pure, overwhelming joy. Isaac, we would call him. He laughs. Because God had brought laughter into our lives, had turned our sorrow into dancing, our mourning into joy. Everyone who heard about his birth laughed with us. They marveled at God's faithfulness, at his power to do the impossible. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? I said to anyone who would listen. Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. It was a testimony, a living, breathing miracle that declared God's glory. And as I nursed my son, feeling his small body warm against mine, I understood something profound. God's timing is always perfect. Even when we can't see it, even when we doubt, even when we try to force our own solutions. He is faithful. Always. Isaac grew, and my heart grew with him. Every milestone, his first smile, his first steps, his first words filled me with a joy I had never known was possible. He was not just my son, he was the fulfillment of decades of prayer, the proof of God's faithfulness, the child of promise. I was fiercely protective of him. Perhaps too much so. But how could I not be? He had come to me so late, so miraculously. The thought of anything happening to him was unbearable. When Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. It was a celebration, a marker of growth and blessing. But during the feast, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Ishmael was mocking Isaac. The older boy, now a teenager, was ridiculing my son. I saw the cruelty in his eyes, the jealousy, and something in me snapped. This could not stand. Ishmael, born of my mistake, could not be allowed to threaten the child of promise. I went to Abraham that night, my words sharp and unyielding. Cast out this slave woman with her son, I said. For the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. Abraham was distressed. Ishmael was his son too, and he loved the boy. But God spoke to him, confirming my words. Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman, God said. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. So Hagar and Ishmael were sent away, and I felt relief. My son was safe, the promise was secure. But I did not know then what test was coming. Years passed. Isaac grew into a strong, intelligent boy. Abraham taught him about God, about the promises, about faith. I watched them together, my heart full of gratitude. And then came the day that nearly destroyed me. Abraham woke early one morning with a strange look in his eyes, a mixture of anguish and resolve. He gathered wood, prepared supplies, and told Isaac to come with him. Where are you going? I asked. To worship, Abraham replied, but something in his voice was off. Something was wrong. I watched them leave, father and son, walking side by side into the distance. I had no idea that Abraham had received a command from God that seemed to contradict everything we had believed. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering. I learned about it later, of course. Learned that Abraham had been willing to obey, even when it meant sacrificing the very child through whom the promise was supposed to be fulfilled. 3 days they were gone. 3 days of growing anxiety, of pacing our tent, of praying without knowing what I was praying for. When they returned, I saw something different in both of them. Abraham looked as if he had aged a decade in 3 days. Isaac was quiet, reflective, changed. Abraham held me that night and wept. And slowly, haltingly, he told me everything. How he had built the altar. How he had bound Isaac. How he had raised the knife. And how, at the last possible moment, God had stopped him. Abraham, Abraham. The angel had called. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. A ram had been caught in a thicket nearby, and Abraham had sacrificed it instead. I listened in horror and awe. God had tested Abraham's faith, had asked for the impossible, and then had provided. He had never intended to take Isaac. He was teaching us something profound about trust, about obedience, about holding even our most precious gifts with open hands. I looked at my son, alive and whole, and understood. Isaac was not truly mine. He belonged to God. He had always belonged to God. I was merely the vessel through whom God had chosen to work His will. It was a hard lesson to learn, especially for a mother's heart. But it was true. And in that truth, I found a deeper peace than I had ever known. I am old now, truly old. My hair is white as snow. My hands are wrinkled and spotted with age. My body moves slowly, carefully, each step measured and deliberate. But my heart is full. I think back over my life, the years of waiting, the pain of barrenness, the foolish attempt to help God by giving Abraham Hagar, the miraculous birth of Isaac, the test that nearly broke us, and I see God's hand in all of it. Every moment, even the dark ones, was part of His plan. I learned that God's promises are not dependent on our worthiness or our ability. They rest solely on His faithfulness. I spent years thinking I was too old, too barren, too broken to be used by God. But God specializes in the impossible. He takes the barren and makes them fruitful. He takes the old and breathes new life into them. He takes our laughter of doubt and transforms it into laughter of joy. Isaac is a man now, strong and faithful. Abraham has already begun to seek a wife for him, someone who will continue the line of promise. I trust that God will provide the right woman, just as He has provided everything else. My story is not really about me. It's about God's faithfulness to keep His word, even when circumstances seem impossible. It's about learning to wait on His timing rather than forcing our own solutions. It's about trusting that He sees the bigger picture even when we can only see our immediate pain. When I look at Isaac, I see not just my son, but the beginning of something vast and eternal. Through him, nations will indeed rise. Through his line, a Savior will one day come, though I cannot fully comprehend what that means. I see it in glimpses, in promises spoken by God to Abraham. I know that our family is part of something larger than ourselves, something that will echo through generations. And it all started with an impossible promise given to an old, barren woman. If you are waiting today, I understand. I know what it feels like to watch years pass with no sign of God's promise being fulfilled. I know the temptation to take matters into your own hands, to force a solution rather than waiting for God's perfect timing. I know the pain of feeling forgotten, overlooked, too old, too broken, too far gone. But I am here to tell you nothing is too hard for the Lord. The same God who opened my womb at 90 years old is the same God who is working in your life today. His timing is not your timing. His ways are not your ways. But His promises are always true. Hold on to faith, even when it seems foolish. Trust Him, even when you can't see the path forward. Wait for Him, even when waiting feels impossible. Because I promise you this, the laughter of joy that comes in His perfect timing is worth every tear shed in the waiting. My name is Sarah, and my legacy is laughter. Not the bitter laugh of disbelief, but the pure, overwhelming laughter of a woman who learned that God is faithful, that His promises never fail, and that with Him, all things are truly possible. May your waiting turn to laughter. May your impossibilities become testimonies. May your faith, like mine, grow strong in the waiting, for nothing, absolutely nothing, is too hard for the Lord. And that truth changes everything.